Okay, today we're going to talk about Objective 2, Understanding Properties and Attributes of Functions. Number 57, which equation is the parent function of the quadratic equation? Now, in some problems on the TAKS test, you're going to be given different types of graphs that you would have to match up. But in this case, you have to be able to recognize that term quadratic and what that means. Quadratic means when you have a function that has the highest power, and it's 2, such as x squared plus 3x plus 1. Or x squared minus 5, or x plus 1 squared minus 7, and so forth. But the parent function is going to be the one that has an association with the origin. And let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. If I'm looking at y equals x squared, and I graph it, let me go back to my standard viewing window, zoom 6. I have a parabola with vertex at 0, 0. It's associated with the origin. Okay? So when I graph any of these other functions here, such as x squared minus 5, when I graph that, it's still going to have that basic parabola shape, but it's going to be shifted 5 units down on the y-axis. So the parent function is the one that has an association with the origin, goes through the origin at some point, touches the origin, and it also has a 1 in front of the x squared. The coefficient of x squared, or x in this case, or x up here, or the square root of x here, the coefficient of x is 1. And it goes through the origin, or the y-intercept is at 0, 0. But in this case, you do need to know the term quadratic means the highest power in the function is going to be 2. Therefore, since it's a quadratic, knowing that it's a quadratic, before you graph it or anything, you know that it has to be d, y equals x squared. Number 12. Mr. Maxwell asked his students to identify the domain represented by the function graph below. Recall that domain is all of our x values. So in other words, we're just going to be looking for what x values are on this function here. So if I look at the far left side, my x value is at -5. If I make that little vertical line straight up and down, you'll see that that will not go past this line to the left. And on my right side, it's going to be +6. So I'm dealing with x values from -5 to +6. So how do I express that in an inequality? Because that's what my answer choices are in the form of. So recall real quick that when you're dealing with an inequality, here we have a closed circle, here we have an open circle. If you have a closed circle, you're going to have things like less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. If you have an open circle, you're going to have less than or greater than. So in this case, since we're just going from left to right, we can simply write our inequality starting with -5. We have an x in the middle and 6 over here on the right, and we can place our signs. If we read our inequality from the variable, let's look at this side first and read it from the variable. If I'm starting from here, I'm going to the right as my x values increase. So x is greater than, so it opens to the bigger number there. It's going to open to the x. X is greater than or equal to, because I have the filled-in circle. And then we'll look at the other side of the inequality, this side, reading from the variable. From this open circle, I go left which is less than, so x is less than 6. So my answer is going to be F, x is greater than or equal to negative 5, and less than 6. Number 56. A sporting goods store sold a total of 80 backpacks at the beginning of a new school year. Each backpack sold for either $35 or $50, not including tax. If X represents the number of $35 backpacks the store sold, which expression represents the total amount of money in dollars from the sales of the two kinds of backpacks, not including tax? Let's go back through the problem and pick out the important pieces of information that we need. There's a total of 80 backpacks. We have two different prices. Some are $35, some are $50. It says that X is going to represent the number of $35 backpacks. So since I'm looking for the total amount, somewhere down here in this expression, $35 has to be associated with X. That means that G or J cannot be correct because here we have 50 being associated with X and the same with G. So far I have F or H can be correct because I have $35 that's associated with X. Since I'm looking for the total, $35 times X number of backpacks is going to give me how much I have total for $35 backpacks. So now I need to look at the other part. What is 50 associated with? Since we have a total number of 80 backpacks, if I subtract away the number of $35 backpacks, that should give me an expression. 80 minus X should represent the number of $50 backpacks. Therefore, H is going to be my correct answer. This is a problem of just going back, rereading the problem, looking at all of your important information and seeing your clues there. Seeing what variables are associated with which numbers and so forth and so on, and trying to place those things together. Number 48. The graph below shows the amount of force needed to stretch a certain spring to various distances. Which of the following best represents the difference between the amount of force in pounds needed to stretch the spring to 10 inches and the amount needed to stretch the spring 4 inches? Let's look at our graph and see what we have. We have along our x-axis force in pounds, our y-axis distance in inches. So if I'm just trying to decipher what I have going on here, if I stretched a spring, let's say put 40 pounds of force on it, go up here, draw this little place here, then I go over and I see if I stretch it with 40 pounds of force, that's going to stretch the spring 8 inches. That's how this graph reads. So if I'm looking at the difference meaning subtract, I'm going to be subtracting here in a minute, I'm looking for the amount of force needed to stretch the spring 10 inches. So let's see, if I wanted to stretch it 10 inches, I start at the 10 for my distance, go over, I make this little point, and I can come straight down and see the force required. It requires 50 pounds of force to stretch 10 inches. So it's going to be 50 minus how much force did I need to stretch it 4 inches. If I go to 4, come over, make a little dot on my line and come straight down, and I see that it takes 20 pounds of force to stretch it 4 inches. So it's 50 minus 20, which is 30. So just interpreting the graph properly and plugging in the right information, and we get H. That's the difference that it requires.